if you've ever seen a brand selling a t-shirt for hundreds of dollars and wondered, is there anything special about this, or is this just a wildly overpriced t-shirt? Wonder no more, we're going to discuss. I'm at a department store that has a designer section, and conveniently I stumbled across the perfect victim for this video. A nearly $600 Balmain t-shirt. I will say, this is not necessarily a terrible t-shirt from a quality perspective. The stitching looks nice from the outside, fabric has a nice hand feel to it, and it doesn't feel flimsy, you know, like some of those t-shirts you feel like you could poke a hole in it with your fingernail. It's not that, it feels pretty robust. But it is literally just a t-shirt, y'all. If you look at the stitching inside, this was sewn with a serger, also known as an overlocker, which really is one of the only ways to sew a t-shirt. Theoretically, there are sort of other things you could do, but serging certainly is the most common. And there is absolutely nothing remotely fancy about serging. I have a little baby serger here at home. The ones you'd have in sewing production facilities are a lot bigger and more efficient. But I love my serger because it allows me to sew knits quickly and easily. And that's why it's not considered a high-end seam finish. It is so fast. It doesn't require a lot of training for an operator to become proficient at it. You can just crank out t-shirts like no tomorrow with one of these. In terms of the design, it just says Balmain Paris or Balmain Paris on it in a heat transfer or screen print of some kind. There's also nothing special about the shape of the t-shirt. There is no embroidery or embellishments of any kind. They're really just giving us nothing. In terms of the fiber content, let's see. 100% of the cotton fibers in this garment come from organic farming and certified. Okay, well thank God for that. I'm glad to hear that it is organic cotton. It would be nice if they told us what kind of certifications it has. But anyway, I'll take their word for it. Organic cotton does typically command a higher price point than conventionally grown cotton, and it is generally, by and large, considered to be a lot better for soil health and the health of surrounding ecosystems, so at least they gave us that. However, the fact remains that this is a $600 cotton t-shirt. I don't know why this was even made. I don't know why anyone would buy this. Frankly, to me, it looks kind of tacky with the name of the brand just written across the chest like that. So yeah, thank you, goodbye. Similarly, you've got this long sleeve t-shirt from Loewe, which I saw at Holt Renfrew about a year ago. Now, this one just pisses me off. Honestly, I don't know that an item of clothing has pissed me off more in my life. That might be an exaggeration, but it might also not. Because not only is the price patently ridiculous, but there is absolutely nothing special about this item of clothing whatsoever. They literally did not even try. No effort was made to make it remotely interesting design-wise or have any construction details or fabrics that were in any way sophisticated or unique. The inside is serged, which, as we've discussed, is not a high-end seam finish, and it is made out of modal and elastane. These are not fabrics that reflect the extravagant price point, in my opinion. Modal is a semi-synthetic fabric made of wood pulp. I'm not aware that there is such a thing as high-end modal. In my head, I thought I recalled that this shirt was in the $300-something range, which I still think is too expensive. But when I found it online, it turns out that the original retail price is $750 Canadian dollars. In no world do I think that that is a reasonable price for this. It is no longer available for purchase, but I'm happy to see that before it was sold out, the price appears to have dropped to $150, which is what it deserves, possibly even less. Although I don't think $150 is necessarily unreasonable for something like this. I think that's just the price that sometimes basics cost, if they're being made fairly and everybody's, you know, being paid. There's a lot that goes into pricing. It certainly is possible to make a long sleeve t-shirt for less than $150, and even possible, I think, to do so ethically. It just kind of depends on the business model and the size of the brand and many other things. But anyway, all that to say, there is absolutely no reason on God's green earth, in my opinion, to charge $750 for this. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, Alex would never buy t-shirts from a luxury brand. Whoop-de-doo. And actually, there are a few limited circumstances where I could maybe understand buying a designer t-shirt, and I'm gonna go over those a little bit later. But you're right, my ire has been focused on t-shirts in this video, but I would extend that to the category of cut and sew knits more broadly, including hoodies, tank tops, probably even sweatpants. And this is because there just aren't a lot of interesting construction techniques that one would use with cut and sew knits. Because of the fact that knits are naturally stretchy, you can't use a regular straight stitch because it will pop open. That really kind of just leaves you with a serger, or sometimes a flat lock if you're doing athletic wear and you don't want seam allowance that's going to rub against the skin. But that looks even more casual than a serger, generally speaking. So given the limited construction techniques, how do you elevate something like that? Well, you can try to make the design more interesting, and again, I'm going to show you some examples where I think brands sort of did that. Or you can use really high-end fibers like expensive wools or silk. And there are some people who really appreciate that kind of thing. Elevated basics and very luxurious fabrics. And then there are others who are like, respectfully, what is the point of luxury fibers for a t-shirt? I see both sides, but personally I kind of fall into camp number 2. My view basically boils down to, if there are limited options to elevate this kind of garment from a craftsmanship perspective, and in particular, if brands are not even going to make an effort to try to elevate it through other means like designs or fiber content, then maybe we should just not be producing designer t-shirts or sweats or the like. Unfortunately, they probably sell well, which is why they continue to exist. That said, cut and sew knits like t-shirts are not the only knits out there. So you might be wondering, what do you think of this other type of knitwear? Let's take as an example this turtleneck from Loro Piana. It is over 5,000 euros. So yeah, right off the bat, very different price bracket than what we've been talking about earlier. Now, it is a fully fashioned knit, so how is that different from a t-shirt? Well, t-shirts are cut and sew, meaning that you have rolls or yards of knit fabric. The production facility making the garment would cut the pattern out of the fabric, and then the pieces would be sewn together, typically with a serger. Fully fashioned knits, like this turtleneck, are not cut out of fabric. They're knit out of yarns by a knitting machine. You can tell this is a fully fashioned knit because you have these fashioning marks where the panels join together as opposed to a sewn seam. I talk a bit more about that and what that all means in my sweater video. But anyway, fully fashioned knits are more expensive to produce than cut and sew. So this is automatically going to be a higher end product than, you know, a t-shirt that was serged. Now, critically, this is also made of vicuña. Vicuñas are cute little animals in the camel family that live in the Andes in South America. They have what is considered to be, if I'm not mistaken, the most luxurious fur in the world. It is extremely fine, making it very soft, and it is somewhat difficult to obtain. They have to be captured and shorn, which I assume they don't like very much, and then released, and I think that only happens at certain times of year. Vicuñas are protected by law in Peru. It is illegal to hunt them, and I believe only certain companies or individuals have the right to shear and use their fur for their products. This all means that their wool is extremely sought after, but difficult to acquire. They're also not very big animals, so it probably takes quite a bit of wool to actually make a full garment. As a result, this type of wool is very expensive. And for some reason, I actually just assumed that this would be a blend of vicuña, but no, this turtleneck is apparently 100% vicuña. So yeah, it's not exactly surprising that it is expensive. So this is a good example of a type of product where even though it is expensive, there are things that are special about it that I can kind of understand the price point a little bit more. Whether you want to spend €5,000 on a turtleneck is another question altogether. I mean, I personally cannot afford that whether I wanted to or not. But do you see how this is kind of different, for me at least, than a t-shirt that is really no different from any other t-shirt you could get anywhere else? This is at least like a little bit special. Finally, since we've spent so much time talking about t-shirts, I'm going to give you some examples of t-shirts that I thought were not awful. When I was at Simon's looking at that ridiculously overpriced Balmain t-shirt, I saw these ones from Amy and Vivienne Westwood. First of all, crucially, neither of these t-shirts were insanely expensive. They are in the $200 range, which I completely understand if that's more than you're willing to spend on a t-shirt. Frankly, it probably is for me too, but it obviously is a lot more reasonable than the Balmain t-shirt. For the Amy shirt, and if you haven't heard of Amy, they're a French brand in that designer or high-end contemporary price point. They've been around for over a decade. They show at Paris Fashion Week. So regarding this t-shirt, first of all, the fabric has a nice hand feel and heft to it. It doesn't feel cheap, which is obviously pretty important for, you know, a $200 t-shirt. But I like that they have elevated the seam finishes very subtly by having some top stitching here. Instead of serging, in some places they cover stitched the seams, which looks a lot like serging on the inside, but has a double needle top stitch on the outside. I don't think this is enough to warrant, you know, a t-shirt being elevated into a $500 price point, for instance, but for $200, I'm kind of sold. Especially because I think the top stitching is so immaculate. Like the Balmain shirt, this t-shirt is made out of organic cotton, which I like to see. There isn't anything really all that exciting about the design. It's a boxy t-shirt with a raglan sleeve. However, because of the quality of the fabric and the prettiness of the top stitching, I can understand why someone might buy this if they were a fan of the brand. Which, like, should you be a fan of the brand? That's another question. They have a not good enough ranking on good on you, so that's disappointing. Moving on to the Vivienne Westwood shirt, it is also organic cotton and also in the $200 range. And what I will say about this one is at least they tried to do something interesting with it. It is asymmetrical and has this odd sleeve that is much shorter than the other one and kind of looks like it's twisting towards the front and even riding up into the armpit a little bit. And to that I say, at least it's not just a basic white t-shirt with a tacky logo splashed across the front, you know? Now, whether it actually looks good is another question altogether. However, I respect that they tried to create a unique shape and silhouette, which I think makes sense with Vivienne Westwood's whole punk and kind of countercultural aesthetic and brand image. Would I necessarily buy it? No, however, I can respect that it's a little different and understand that somebody who really appreciates the brand might want to. Again, Vivienne Westwood sadly also has a not good enough ranking on Good On You, and so does Loewe, so none of the brands we've talked about today are really stellar from an ethical or sustainability perspective, so that's disappointing. Balmain is even worse. They have a we avoid, so good, let's avoid them and their $600 t-shirt from hell. Alright, enough of my ranting and raving. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you don't want to miss more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video.